Hi everyone, my name is 𝗬𝗪𝗁𝗁 and I'm happy to welcome you to the 8th and final episode of Reprogramming Strategies for Self-Renewal, the festival of conversations curated and conducted by Spanish writer and journalist specialized in technology and power, Marta Peirano. Reprogramming consists of 8 streaming events taking place on a monthly basis throughout the year. All episodes and further information about the series can be found on the project's website. Today, we welcome the architect and founding director of the research agency Forensic Architecture, Eyal Weizman. Truth is hardly making it under an information ecosystem defined by speed, exploitation, opacity, and inequality. But journalism is not in danger, it is just happening somewhere else. Forensic Architecture was founded to test the methodology for analyzing the occupation of Gaza as a crime scene using buildings as witnesses, satellite data as evidence, and models and artificial intelligence as tools for the testing and verification of new hypotheses. This exercise of counter-forensics has been replicated and improved over the years to provide new evidence against official narratives in international human rights courts. It also prompted a new genre of journalistic procedurals and a community of practice that, under the moniker Investigative Commons, seeks to confront the disinformation machines of counter-factual neo-fascist groups by socializing the development and deployment of counter-forensic evidence. Also, for this final episode, we have special guests with us in the studio who, in the second half of the event, will enrich the conversation with their questions. Furthermore, we invite everyone out there to participate in the debate through the web chat available on the website, which allows you to share thoughts, considerations, doubts, links with the rest of the community and ask questions to our guests. So, here we go. Eyal Weizman talking to Marta Peirano. Eyal, Marta, thanks for accepting to be part of this. Please take it away.
Well, that's me. Thank you, Janice. Hi, Eyal. So this is definitely the last chapter of the reprogramming series, and I am beyond excited to share it with a person that has been incredibly inspiring for me as a thinker, as a journalist, and as a lifelong researcher of the relationship between power and technology. I first fell in love with Eyal with his, I think his first solo book in 2007, an essay called Hollow Israel's Architecture of Occupation, where he describes basically colonization by infrastructure, a story that begins with a single cell tower that is built for security reasons, paradoxically, and quickly turns or branches into the Migron settlement on the West Bank. And then he went and founded Forensic Architecture, definitely my favorite project alive today, a research group based in Goldsmiths University where he teaches, and also a project that has sprouted a new ways of seeing, to paraphrase or to co-opt John Berger's title, and it's a way that comes from inverting what Eyal calls the forensic gaze and turn it against the actors like police, military, government, secret services, etc. He calls this counter-forensics. And now he's going to tell us what counter-forensics are. So, hi. Hi, Eyal Weizman. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. So happy we get an opportunity to speak again to each other. And I just have an opportunity to thank Janusz fucking Jensa, which is, it's the privilege of saying that middle word and meaning it in that context is important. Counter-forensics, you asked? What is counter-forensics?
Of all things.
Yeah. So I can tell you what it's not. It's not like as if, because in a sense, it's an inversion of the forensic gaze. It's not state forensics. It's not coming from the genealogy of the intersection of policing and science that evolved in the 18th and 19th century to govern populations and create the concept of the criminal and the delinquent through archiving of biometric data, early biometric data like fingerprints, creating photographic archives, etc. It is not as if counter-forensics is simply like the people have taken over the forensic lab and turned around that tool against the state. Yes, counter-forensics investigates the investigators. We never take commissions from the police, the army, the secret services. We only investigate those kind of investigators. But we are using also very different techniques than what the state use. So in order to think about what forensics is, you need to think about the spaces in which it happens. And there are three spaces in which forensics, that is state forensics, take place. The first is the cordoned off area around the crime scene. Somebody gets shot. The first thing that pops up is a tape, a yellow tape. And that means that that area becomes a zone of exception. It's cut out of daily life. It becomes a space only for state investigators to enter. And if you're not on uniform, you need to flash out your card and you can enter into that. Otherwise, no unauthorized investigators are allowed to enter. The second place of forensics is the lab. And that is also another kind of hermetic site of exception that is based on other kind of protocols of purification and controlled science. And the third is, the holiest of holy, is the court, in which the state regulates speech and the process of establishing facts. Counter-forensics need to invert all those three spaces. It needs something to leak out of the cordoned off area. Either it's a leak, literally, and we work a lot with leaks of either soldiers, whistleblowing police officers, or it is something that was captured before the cordon came up. Satellite images, videos from user-generated material, etc. So something needs to cross this sort of otherwise impenetrable border of that site of epistemic and political exception that is the crime scene. Then instead of the counter-forensics in the lab challenges the process of doing science rather than keeping the parameters hermetic, rather than keeping the process under closed doors. We are undertaking a collaborative process that includes scientists, but also activists, and also lawyers, and also artists, etc., participating in a way that proper scientific procedures would frown upon. There is, evidence could not be dirtied. And we work a lot with dirty evidence, with the excess in evidence. And the third is the court. Sometimes we go into the court. Sometimes we go like we're trying to turn the tribunal into a tribune, like to critique the very legal system itself. I come from Israel-Palestine, and that there the law is not always protecting, or never it is. In fact, the law is part of the colonial system itself. And therefore, one has to find alternatives to working within legal fora. And sometimes these are activist forms, sometimes these are social movements, sometimes these are art and cultural spaces. So this was a very long answer to what is counter-forensics, but it has to invent its own methodologies, because precisely it has to deal with the structural limitations of not having access to the crime scene very often, and not having access to the court. So therefore, everything that we're going to be speaking about today is a response to structural limitations. And how do you make do with fewer evidence? How do you make do with dirtier evidence? How do you make claims outside the court, etc.? Is I think the essence of what we do, Marta.
So the thing is, when you're explaining all I think is this is what journalists have been doing, what we have been doing all these years, maybe with less resources. I am constantly participating in events, festivals, and congresses where people of the media complain about how they are living in a crisis, and big platforms are intoxicating the media ecosystem, etc. And yet, I do have a strong impression that we are experiencing a golden era of journalism precisely because of the kind of methodologies that you and your team are developing right now. And so I would ask you, what do you have that newspapers don't have or should have? Or what would be the difference between what a newspaper should be doing, like the way it should be researching and reporting all this material, and the way you are doing it?
This is really an excellent question, and in particular because one cannot sort of box in what journalism is today. Journalism is dynamic. It is changing. It is changing in conversation with science. It is changing in conversation with social media. It is changing in conversation with a sort of like dark epistemology that is out there that kind of tries to demolish facts. So, but let's start from a sort of caricature of journalism. A good investigative journalist, and I know this is not all it is, but they're very much associated with the idea of the source, of cultivating sources. So, say I've been around and I've been a military reporter, I would have my sources in the Pentagon or in the Israeli Ministry of Defense or in the British Army or etc. And, when people wanted to make information public, they would let me know what it is. Maybe they'll show me a document. I will not maybe even share this document. I will never quote that person. But there is an understanding that my sources are true because I'm a journalist and that's my ethics. And trust me, this is what is going on. And the kind of the source protection, not problem, but part of journalistic work require precisely the opposite of academic work, and that's not to footnote, not to say who it is, not to say how you have arrived at a particular fact. Open source, on the other hand, has a very different diagram of secrecy. So let's say as journalists or investigators, one of the things that we would try to expose are secrets, things that we would bring to the public, things that are otherwise denied from the public. And so the imagination of the secret that exists within the source-based system is as if there is a world of secrets, there is a door behind it, and you need a kind of a way in from the world of the secret to the world of the open. With open source, and open source investigation is basically harvesting what it is out there, but nobody looks at anyway. Open source is, trying to find out facts about an Israeli invasion, a military strike, a bomb strike in Syria, an event, a police killing, a police murder in the US, etc. Not by trying to get to the vaults and to the secret part of the police where the facts are hidden, but actually by trying to find clues that are already out in the public domain. So the conception of the secret that exists in our work and in open source work is the secrets are already out there. We just don't know where to look for them, and we don't know how to look when we find them. We need to find new ways of looking, of connecting, of cross-referencing, of building cases, of constructing, exposures as a complicated thing. The things are out there because if you have a policy such as extraordinary rendition, one of the biggest known secrets, but still a secret, of the CIA in the context of the war on terror was that the CIA was grabbing people, say in a Pakistan-Afghanistan frontier, but in other places, They were flying them to third countries and from them to fourth, fifth, sixth countries where they could bypass the prohibition on US agents to engage in torture, but by actually kind of like outsourcing torture to other people. But these cases required a network of planes, and the planes required a network of, petrol and receipts and subcontractors, etc. So effectively, the most secret CIA operation in the history of the 21st century has left enormous amount of traces in the open. And those traces existed on social media, and those traces could be arrived at from freedom of information requests, and those traces could be arrived by simply plane spotting and seeing that planes that are landing in all sort of places were not really registered in a way that is understandable, where they're going from where to where. And you can start constructing the secret from the shadows it leaves in the visible world. So it's not that it is not journalism. Journalism has, always had an open source dimension to it, and journalism has been very fast in adopting these techniques through pioneers such as Bellingcat and others. And you have major news organizations now doing open source research, but it's very different from the source-based secret kind of source that you have that tell you things that cannot be verified. It's based on verification from an enormous amount of information. Yanis was saying that one of the first cases that we worked on was in Gaza, and in fact it was on exposing an Israeli horrible and secret order. And the order was that if an Israeli soldier falls captive by a Palestinian armed group, you would enact something that is called the Hannibal Directive. And the Hannibal Directive was a secret command that allowed soldiers effectively to kill one of their own, lest they become a prisoner. Now, one way to expose it would be to have a source and to tell you, oh yes, there is this command and it's locked here in this building in Tel Aviv. The other one, and this is what we were doing, was to actually connect fragments of facts, 7,000 video that we found online, in order to see exactly what happened and in order to show the intentionality in that process.
The thing is, let me first remind our viewers that you can leave your own questions in the box that Axioma provided for this purpose, and if you're lucky, then Eyal will answer them after my own questions. But going back to the thing, this reminds me of there was this essay that Malcolm Gladwell wrote published in the New Yorker, I think around 2005, precisely called Open Secrets, where he was talking about the fact that there was like a different kind of journalism that was manifested after the Enron scandal. It's funny how far away that feels right now. And he was talking precisely about this, like the sources, secret-based kind of journalism of the Watergate, where you have like a deep throat that meets you at 3 a.m. in some garage, and then you work on that for 3 years, and you spend half the time, finding out whether he's legit or not. And then there was the Enron case, where there was like 2 people in the Washington Post basically reading through the immense, insufferable amount of paperwork, because all the secrets that exposed Enron's I don't even know the name in English for this, criminal conduct, was actually in the open. It was just that you required enormous amount of energy and time from qualified journalists in order to find out. So
exactly.
This makes me think one of my favorite projects of forensic architecture is the one you did around the investigation you did around this sweatshop in Pakistan that burned. And I was so impressed by the layering of your research that involved all sorts of bureaucratic paperwork, including what the permissions and different paperwork that the building had gone through in the previous years, and all the different I don't know, visits that they had from, I guess, their health minister appointees and things like that. And I was thinking, well, the one thing that forensic architecture has that newspapers do not have is time. Time has become in a world of where we literally like drinking data, soaked in data, surrounded by data, receiving data all the time. You have the luxury of time, and at the same time, you have the affordance of your own tools. No, because like for instance, our second guest in the series was Benjamin Bratton, and he talks a lot about this idea of this planetary scale computation layer that should be given us enough information to sort out our existential climate problems, among other things. And of course, one of the problems is that most of this technology is in the hands of the same companies that benefit from not solving the problem. In this case, forensic architecture is working with data that has been, you said leak, that is sort of like leaking from this machine, no? From this machine, like you can even say that you are using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house in a way, but in a very kind of like twisted manner. And I wonder, for instance, you are producing your own tools for this purpose, and we've talked about this before. You said that every case that you take is a case that generates its own forensic tools and research tools. And then these tools become useful for similar cases that other people can take, for instance, in newspapers. So what would be, like, after how long it's been, 10 years, you've been repeating this process with different cases. So what would be the things you have learned that we could incorporate in our practice in the media world?
In journalistic practice, yeah. I guess I've learned that, you know, really the value of patience and quality. And I've realized, so let's go back to that moment where there is a spill, and you know the spill comes as terabytes, and today open source harvesting, right? What you get from on an online search around an incident is no longer 3-4 videos from 3-4 perspectives that you can reconstruct. But you know, our work in Hong Kong, for example, had to deal with thousands and thousands of videos, each one more than, you know, between an hour and 2 hours long, because they were streaming. It was the entire duration of the event. So the volume of data increases. And then you always need to find, so it's not simply, okay, to say it's there and you can find it. You need to learn how to look again. The process of looking for us, and this is where the architecture, you know, forensic architecture is, looking is construction. So, you know, typically would start with a 3D model. And a 3D model would anchor all the data, the documentary data and the videos and the photographs and the satellite and the testimony, because we interview people within our 3D models. We can talk about that later, further if you like, Marta. And the 3D model becomes a navigational device, backwards and forwards in time, left and right, up and down. So navigation in space and navigation in time. And it's a database, it's a dynamic database. so that the act of viewing becomes an act of construction. It's literally architectural. You have it in space and time. You create a space that Walter Benjamin called the Bildraum, the image space. You are surrounded by images from all perspectives. It's not simply you inhabit the space of images, the space of media. And architecture is excellent to do that. What I've learned is that at the beginning we wanted to be as fast. We wanted to keep the beat. We wanted to to be working on stories fast, to have them out there, like in a media cycle. And we understood it's an error because there's another dimension to our work, and that is opening up the imagination as to what is possible to do. And also because often we are not journalists in the sense that we're covering different parts of the world, or there are areas of interest for us and we would go there. We are commissioned to do work. We would not enter a space of people's trauma uninvited. I will not go to investigate the death of a person unless their friends or their loved ones, the bereaved family, would ask me to do it. I will not go to investigate cases of environmental destruction of a community that is in the front line of that is not asking me. And that's not how journalism works. And then the process of honoring a life lost, the process of resisting political oppression requires care, and it requires time, and it requires very, very slow, sometimes negotiation and understanding as we work with these communities that are at the forefront, as we learn from them, as we adopt their language and aims. We do not want to work also like Amnesty, like a human rights organization, a kind of universal human rights organization that with stations everywhere. We do not want to have a neutral position to the situation that we report upon. We're not impartial. We're always partial. We have a much more activist position. We're precise. We'll give the information. We'll not say things that we think are untrue, or that we found are untrue. But we would basically lend our techniques and tools to a particular struggle, in a struggle to which we were invited, particularly, and after the leadership of the people in the forefront. And not always we did that. Sometimes we learned from our mistakes when we didn't do that, and when we could see that well-meaning intervention could end up disempowering people that are in the forefront of particular struggles. So it became very important for us to say, we'll take very few cases, we'll give them the care and the time and the learning that they require. We would invest a lot in in making the product proper, clear, and perfect to our understanding of it, as a way of honoring that request of people asking us. When bereaved parents or other relatives come to me and they ask what to do, I said, the only thing that we can promise you is when we have taken your case, and we take maybe one of every 20 requests that comes to us, when we take it, we will commit ourselves fully to discover the truth about what has happened. And we will explain it in the best way we can. We'll not cut corners. And our way of honoring your pain and your struggle is through the care and careful and detailed work. And that is, so the entire ethical position is very different than journalism. And this is why it lends itself sometimes to cultural venues and art venues, because they allow us to expose a case on its multiple dimension. Each one of those forums that we present our work, whether it's the court, the parliamentary commission of inquiry, truth commission, people's tribunal, protests somewhere, media of various forms, social media, art and cultural spaces, each one is imperfect. Each one conditions and limits what you can say in a different way. The way for us to offset the limitation of each one of those forums is to take a same piece of work, present it in the court to do one kind of work, and that work is, very linear sometimes. Yes or no, what happened between in this millisecond, in this split second. And then in the media, you tell another story. And when you put it in a gallery, you can actually unpack the social, the historical, and sometimes the theoretical dimension of what it is that you do. So this is what I've learned is slow down, don't rush. Doing fewer cases well is better because showing quality, investing the limited resources, it's not like we have more resources than journalism. We have much less. We're a small group. We work on small budgets, but we can focus our resources. That's what we do. We focus all our resources on a particular, kind of like molecule of the world. No, we zoom in our energy onto something very small. We work in large teams, very multidisciplinary. We work with the people that we put a lot of pressure on this acupuncture, kind of on this point, because by doing it well, you show the state that you oppose. You show the police. You show the military. You show the Secret Service that civilians, that civil society, the social movement can provide that level of clarification, that we can do that. And showing the possible is better than simply working on a kind of, on an equal blanket level and covering all cases in the same way. So, we had it from the start, but I think that was a right decision. And I think this is what we need to do more. Less cases, very well, because we want our cases to become exemplary, both technologically, in the sense that we would develop new tools for that and then we'll make it public, but also in terms of the imagination. You can do that. This is possible. And then, inspire others also to engage in similar work.
That was actually the next question I was going to ask you, because given the fact that you are focusing so granularly in exemplary cases precisely to provide with the toolkit that would be useful for similar ones in the future, also in the ideas world, and we will eventually talk about your cloud atlas, which is ingenious and interesting, and also exemplary of the kind of ideas that come from your modeling of real story of real space storytelling. My question was, can you scale it up? Like, I was thinking, for instance, now that we are done with the COP26, which has been useless in every possible way, but for the ability to annoy all the important people and cause despair and frantic nihilism, I guess. But I was thinking a lot about how the tools for accountability are missing, and at a large scale, the tools for like accounting restoration, for instance, are missing, and how useful would be the kind of tools that you are developing in forensic architecture for, climate activists all over the world precisely for this very purpose, considering that a COP26 can be like a court. No, like you can go there and prove that the restoration that was promised never happened, that the promises of the previous COP also never happened, and create like a framework to account for all this missing, missing objects of goodwill, I guess, from the big economies, big companies, etc. So do you think these tools that you're developing can be scaled up to be used by activists all over the world for this very large court environment, say?
Yeah, I guess, sometimes we think about the question of scale as a question of growing our office. And yes, I mean, we are bigger than, we were a few years ago. Now we're about 30 of us now. We have several offices, one in Berlin that we just opened, and others, which I don't want to mention right now. And so this is one way of increasing capacity. The other is more to think slightly more like academics, not like a company or like a business, and that is like a field. To grow as a field rather than as a practice, rather than as our office. And to grow as a field means to always be in exchange, in conceptual exchange with other people that are working within that. And we see a field is growing, and we are part of an ecosystem of organizations. Many of them are members of the Investigative Commons, 𝗬𝗏𝗪𝗏 and Bellingcat and ECCHR, obviously, they're kind of one of the bigger ones, sort of very, very feisty group of lawyers based in Berlin. 𝗬𝗏𝗪𝗏, a group of Arab investigative journalists, and others in other places in the world. And ideas grow faster than companies. And, that is really where, the kind of the other hat that we have. So we spoke about journalism, we spoke about forensic work. We're based in the university, and I'm an academic. And forensic architecture is an academic project in a sense that it's a research unit in the university. Therefore, I'm committed as an academic to the public, to the greater public, to make our idea, to generate and disseminate ideas. We only take cases in as much as they are an opportunity to develop new ideas or technologies and disseminate them. We cannot keep, and we don't want to keep, anything proprietary to us only. So that is the way is not to, it's to be open, to be in exchange with other practitioners, and to know that things grow in an unexpected way. No, I mean, the technologies that, Bellingcat and us were working with, open source research and modeling, some of them are in the mainstream now. So, there's a unit in the New York Times that is doing very similar things to us. They have much more capacity, more people, more money, so they do more work. And perhaps their focus is slightly different, that they're not really needing to develop every time a new idea, though they're doing very well. The Washington Post now open it. BBC is open, kind of units like ours. It's growing in the human rights sector. Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have now their own kind of open source labs and forensic using forensic architectural techniques. There are things that don't happen directly. I mean, in those examples, we had we had agency and being in exchange and helping set those things up. In other places, things just pop up. Other people have other ideas that intersect with ours. You can see a field growing, and the kind of scaling up works as a sort of a consolidated network of things. And whereas in the past, I think, definitely the issue of human rights tend to be much more monopolized than any other field. I mean, what kind of, only in the tech business you have that level of quasi-monopoly like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have in the human rights field, like big clearinghouses. Doing excellent work, obviously, work that we all depend on. But our thought is not to grow, but to actually network with others, to create ecosystematic way of thinking. It's how you link, not how you grow. And we want to kind of be part of always different ecosystems that work on particular issues. So when we work in Palestine, we have the groups there that are, been very rooted there, and we've worked a lot. Both organizations and individuals that we would collaborate with. And in other places, it would be others, but we don't need to expand and kind of develop. And I know that it's not what you were saying at all. So I think that, but maybe the important thing that I wanted to say is that when you work from an academic perspective, you understand that ideas have their own trajectory.
Well, before I ask my next question, let me remind again the viewers that you can ask your own questions. Use the box that Axioma has provided for you. And so, how do you pick your cases? Like, I know you try to pick different cases to develop different tools for them, as you have mentioned before. But like, is it like a combination of cause, source, in the sense of, you don't pick cases from companies, for instance, or what is the manual for convincing forensic architecture to take your case?
Firstly, it's the sincerity of the people that approach us. So as I said before, Marta, we have learned not to enter the space of trauma uninvited. We are working very close with the human body, on the human body and what has happened. To keep that dignity, you cannot just like say, oh, I want to work on this because that is an interesting or an important case, because you become, you don't know what exactly how that case is being played out emotionally and socially within a community and politically. So that's the first thing. We need to be invited. So we much more now like private eyes than kind of like a research agency that decides its own direction. Though we understand that there is a bias with it. There are people that will be connected and will know us, and they will be part of a particular class of people worldwide. It could be, we work in Colombia as we work in Indonesia now, and in across the world. But it would be only some people that would know about us and would have the confidence to approach us. So we need to sometimes make ourselves available in different ways, and we can talk about that later. So that's one thing. Second, we have a kind of a diagram that is called the long duration of a split second, meaning when we investigate that kind of minutia of time, split second, always the police said they've killed somebody in a split second decision. It's the smallest unit of perceptual time, the indivisible unit of perceptual time. We'll always locate it in a world of which it is part. If we look at the molecular level of time, we want to see in them the structural forces, the long histories that have brought things there. So when we look at police killing in the UK of Mark Duggan, a black man shot in Tottenham, we need to ask that question in relation to a history of black resistance to British policing. and how that was articulated. And so what are we seeing in that microseconds analysis, and how to tie to the history of colonialism, to the history of migration and over-policing of racialized bodies. Same in Palestine. If we investigate the killing of a kid by the Israeli soldiers, we would see it within the kind of as an iteration of a longer history. So, test number one, are we invited? Test number two, is there a kind of an echo-punctual diagram? Can we enter through putting pressure on a single point and describe wider political forces? Three is technologically, are we the right people to do? Can we come up with something that could our optic capture a particular situation? And in as much as the answer is yes, or in as much as could be, we would take it. So we say often, I don't know if it's always true, but we aspire not to take cases that we know how to do, that we can tell in the first moment what would be the result. We would tend to pass it on to people that we train, or we would pass on something like that. So that is that. Sometimes there's a question of affordability, if we can find funding for something, and then our funding is very stratified also. So we have the academic grants that take care of the research and development and the dissemination of ideas. So that's kind of like the bottom fourth of our, layered cake, beautiful Slovenian layered cake that I at least one thing, maybe it's Viennese, but I ate it in Slovenia when I was there last. And then you have the human right funding there. Maybe you have tech funding there. And then at the top, maybe you have some money that you get from a museum that can help you put the extra care on the edit of a film or something like that.
So how often do you say no?
Just too often. It's heartbreaking, but that's the almost the default right now.
And the general cause, when you say no because you don't have the technical abilities, is that something that happens? Because it seems to me that would be incompatible with your needing the challenge, no?
Yeah, but we see that actually what they need is a good DNA specialist, or actually what they need is a good psychologist, or a forensic psychologist, or what is needed something else. It's not within our field. It's just too far out that this is not something that we can develop.
I suddenly imagine you like Olivia Pope, the main character of the soap opera Scandal, where people go with their assassinations, and she's like, consider it handled. So let's go back to the aesthetics part of all this business, because it is obvious that aesthetics are a very, very important part of your trajectory. Like, you've written at least 2 books about them. You just published a book about the forensic aesthetics. When you talk about the New York Times and the Washington Post developing their own procedures a la forensic architecture, what is clear to me is that they are doing the things in your aesthetic, no? Like, this idea of building up from a 3D model and then creating a story that happens in this space, this three-dimensional understanding of a single event. So what are the keys to the aesthetics that you're developing?
So that's a very, you're right, Mark. I just published a book on aesthetics together with my colleague here at Goldsmiths, Matthew Fuller. It's called Investigative Aesthetics. And I'm so deep in it that I don't know if I can give a short answer. I'll try, because it's kind of a very complicated and argument that we're trying to develop there. Initially, we say the category of aesthetics should be completely seen outside of the kind of the notion of beautification or judgment towards art object, or to the way things are pleasing or not, or to have a style. So aesthetics is a form of registration. The aesthesis in Greek is that which is perceived, that which leaves a trace. And the perception is not only in our system, is not only human perception. So there's an aesthetic of your chair, of the desk on which you speak, and it reads your body temperature, and it changes in relation to it, even in a very, very micro level. So the table is aestheticized to your hand, to your body that is next to it. And likewise, every surface, from a leaf sensing the sun to the earth sensing radiation to a wall of a building sensing a trajectory, projectile that is thrown at it. These are sensing surfaces. And then we move on to describe something that we call the hyperesthetics. Hyperesthetics is an act. So it's not describing the fact that everything senses in the world. This is almost truism and obvious. But to say that we need to amplify aesthetics perception. We need to find a way to look deeper into photographs and into what is inscribed in them. And we need to learn to look closer at material surface to identify very carefully the traces that are there, and to stare at them sometimes for hours until they give us those secrets. And we need to know how to work on a relation between those different material sensing surfaces. A film, the negative that senses, the table that senses, the wall, the plant. How do you build something of a relation between them? So that is really what it is that aesthetics play for us. It's the amplification of our capacity to register traces. And obviously today, a lot of it is done digitally. So we're kind of thinking that we're living in a hyperesthetic time, simply because we always registered, we always tracked. Every digital move that we do leaves a trace, and those traces are being harvested and processed by various sort of big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence systems. So this is the kind of aesthetics that we refer to, rather than how our things look. But of course, we also know that there is a paradox that every forensic and every legal specialist is aware of. And that is, like a lawyer, how important is presentation, your rhetoric, your quality of your presentation within a court system, let's say. How much it would depend, the verdict would depend on the quality of that. And every forensic specialist knows how important is, the quality of your presentation within court, actually also visual or auditory in that context. But even if we know, though, we need to hide the fact it even depends on aesthetics, because people perceive aesthetics as a trickery. People perceive aesthetics as a kind of a play, an emotional trickery, or sort of a illusory play. In fact, when I gave my book as a gift to one of the lawyers we work with, he said, "That's all very, very interesting, Eyal, but when I call you to the stand, would you please promise me never to mention the word aesthetics in relation to your forensic work?" And I said, "I understand exactly what you mean."
And so, I remember a few years ago, not so long ago, there was a national newspaper in Spain that published a pretended leak that had all the aesthetics, no, of a redacted official document that had been photocopied a number of times before being given away, maybe to eliminate traces of I don't know, of different machines, no, that could identify a source. And I thought that was very interesting. Like, what does this offer as a document? What the look of this document is offering to the reader? No, like, you know, all the layer of significance that comes under that. And I think a lot about that when I see forensic architecture's work, and I even think, like, you know, what kind of what kind of influence would they be having from a world that has been watching CSI for the last 20 years and have been soaking in leak paraphernalia? No, it seems that the WikiLeaks school of journalism has also produced like an idea of what constitutes a legitimate document, no? And I wonder, when you're developing this new tools that have a lot to do with storytelling, because your tools are not only for research, like the layer that we see more often is the storytelling layer, which is also one of the reasons why I wanted to finish the reprogramming series with you, because, you know, we started with Kim Stanley Robinson, that proposes a new way of thinking about the future, and you propose new ways of thinking about information and reading the world. And so I wonder how intoxicated you are from a world of CSI serials, and you know, and this infatuation that journalism has these days with a leak and with a kind of like NSA toolbox, and this sort of aesthetics. Do you feel a bit contaminated by that? Do you find that useful maybe when you're developing?
I never watched CSI. I hate it. I hate detective novels, and which is really surprising because that's what I should be watching, no? But I try to steer away from that genre very much, because I find in it, in the contours of the kind of CSI, police drama, exactly the diagram of repression that I'm afraid of. Somebody is being, usually a vulnerable person, designated as a deviant. The state is the guarantor of order, would clarify things, and would reestablish the order and the peace through kind of like an enlightenment sort of science and procedure. It doesn't have the guts. It doesn't have the activism. It doesn't have the kind of the force of protest that I like, or that I aspire to include in our work. So it's not, if it does look like that at the end, I'm sorry. It's just that I don't know how they, I try not to look at CSI videos. Now, in terms of the aesthetics of the document, that's very much more interesting. Also, very interesting point that you said. That of course there is a kind of an aesthetic in a sort of hyper media kind of environment. There is something that 𝗬𝗏 called poor images, no? The kind of like the grainy, badly framed, sort of like
Stolen.
shaking, that feel more authentic. And the document, kind of like the handwritten document or hand-redacted document, where you see the kind of the way the hand of the state kind of like cutting out information from it. I find this is the rare kind of things that we find. We're existing much more in an era of like digital information. We'd usually see, if there are images at all, they would be very much code. Or what's interesting about those images is the code or the metadata or other elements that are not necessarily visual and don't have the kind of the aesthetics of the old file. It's funny that because whenever we ask a graphic designer, we need sometimes to get letterheads or logos or all sort of books and stuff. Everybody's first idea tend to be, let's make your identity look like an old sort of like gray paper file, because that's what people think with forensics. And I go like, it's completely what we are like, the entire essence of the practice is against this. It goes against that kind of image. I mean, we train machine learning algorithms to help us see. I mean, when I say the act of seeing is complicated and require construction, is because we just simply cannot have enough people looking at 4,000 hours of a certain incident, and you need to automate part of the viewing. And the viewing is now no longer of poor images in a 𝗍𝗿 sort of sense, but of like high resolution, good audio, like you have a lot of information in every second of a video.
Well, maybe your aesthetics, what they play is the depth of data that is proven by the reenactment, no? Like, in the sense of maybe Tom McCarthy's Remainder sort of reenactment of an event, that the three-dimensionality of the reenactment proves, in a way, from an aesthetic point of view, that the research has been deep enough to know, how long a wall was, and I think this is a very good moment to talk about the Cloud Atlas. Tell us what a Cloud Atlas is, and why did you need it to look at a scene from the right angle?
Excellent. So, it kind of started when I was, before really forensic architecture was a thing. In 2008, I was asked by human rights organization based in Palestine to call into Gaza. Gaza was under intense, horrible bombardment in 2008 in the winter. And they asked me to call because they didn't want people to call with Israeli dialing code. So I was in London and calling those people. And one of the people told me, you know what? I think I'm breathing in my home. My home is turned from solid to gas, and I'm breathing in my home. And I understood that, as an architect, I thought it was very interesting for me. Architecture can exist in a gaseous form because, the bomb cloud are everything that the building was. They're plaster, and they are stone, and they are glass, and they are wood, and they are curtains, and they are the drugs that you have in your kitchen. All of that get mixed together, sometimes parts of human bodies, and that, makes all sort of dynamic shapes, and then it falls. And then we understood also that those shapes are exactly what can allow us to create the most important thing when you do open source research. So everybody, you should know, but I hope our viewers know, that when you do open source research, you look at, what happened in Gaza on, the 1st of August 2014. You look at it online, you put some hashtags and some keywords, and you get videos. You don't know exactly where they were taken because YouTube and Facebook and Twitter remove the metadata. So you have to rely on what people say. Those people would say, I took it here and there. But you need to check that. So the biggest problem of open source information is, the first thing is to create a timeline, which video is before and which is after, what's the relation in time, and where exactly are they taken. And to do that, you need things in the image that we call physical clocks, i.e., something in the image need to give you an idea of what the time is when you film. And, we're working with shadows, and we are analyzing the length of shadows and the direction of shadows, and this helps us find different things. And finally, we realized that the best way to do it is to actually look at the sky, because every cloud is always unique at any particular moment. And when you create a cloud atlas, a mapping of the skies, almost every video includes a little bit of sky in it, and every sky has got a cloud or two inside it. And every cloud is different at any given moment. If you can create a map of the sky, you can locate in relation to it each video that you find. And that is the Cloud Atlas. And Cloud Atlas, as you know, is also interesting for us from a conceptual, art historical point of view. Cloud Atlases is what is really the beginning of collaboration between artists and scientists at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century. Kind of meteorology evolves out of, very similar to us, different because it's a different time, painters and scientists working together to classify the sky, to understand what clouds are which, what types they are, and how they behave. And the thing about clouds is that they always move faster than the speed of the hand could capture them. Therefore, they always have to be imagined or modeled rather than simply described. The act of representation is not linear. It's complicated. It's either imaginative or it's mathematical. And this is where we started to get interested in clouds. And we realized that a lot of our work is dealing with clouds, with a weaponization of the air. We're working a lot on tear gas. Obviously, that's a kind of the most basic anti-democratic kind of substance. It pushes people out of the public space where people gather and stand in close proximity. But then we were looking at chemical strikes in different places, gas that, basically create an unlivable zone and kill people in Syria and elsewhere. Then we were looking at forest fires, and that scaled it up again. So forest fires in Papua or in the western part of Indonesia, creating clouds that are continental in scale. They're covering, 12 different countries at the same time, from East Papua to all the way to Thailand, for example, leading to hundreds and tens of thousands of premature deaths. So in a sense, cloud is allowing you to scale up. The question of scaling up, thinking about cloud is thinking across scales, across time. But it has always the same capacity. How do you map that which constantly changes? And what is the territory that the cloud produces? What kind of architecture is produced? Usually our architecture is hard surfaces of buildings, and it's the grids into which we are tucked by those planners that pigeonhole us into our place within the grid. But the cloud cuts through it, and it creates a territory that is dynamic, but it's a shared condition. And I wonder whether us architects, rather than thinking about the hard space, we should look at this sort of dynamic, amorphous, gaseous territory of the cloud.
Well, definitely, that looks a lot like the kind of planetary scale computation that we would need to look at the sky in productive ways, to look at the planet in productive ways, and do something about its existential crisis. Oh, okay, so I am now warned that my time is almost over, so I have to leave you with our guests. There are 3 guests in the studio in Ljubljana today. waiting for their turn to ask you their questions. So, hello, first guest. How are you doing?
Hello. Hi, great. Thank you for this very interesting conversation. I have so many questions, but let me decide on one. So, as I understand, you developed the Cloud Atlas because you lacked the information that you couldn't gather from the tech giants. So I was wondering, maybe are you hoping to one day cooperate with them to get the information that would help you easier find some clues? Are you jealous about the information that they have? Would you like to, I don't know, tackle that forensic architecture on the digital space in the way that you're doing in a physical space?
Thank you. I don't know if simply jealous of the information they have. I just don't think they should have it. I think this should be public domain information, in as much as people are happy to share that. But we are also working on digital violence, and we recently collaborated with Amnesty and Citizen Lab on an analysis of the Pegasus attacks, and we wanted to see. And if you look online in our investigation, it is really doing a kind of digital investigation, or the investigation of digital violence, of hacks, of this horrible kind of spyware. Pegasus is an Israeli-made spyware that was used to hunt down and spy on activists and journalists all over the world. What does it mean to do open source research on digital violence? It means to see what is the relation between different hacks. Not so much, we don't have the capacity in our studio, that's what Amnesty and what Citizen Lab do, to detect that software. What we could see is what's the relation between this hack and another hacks, or between this hack and events that happen to a person in a physical world. What interested us is what happened to somebody the moment they get hacked. What happened to their lives? What happens to their livelihood? What's happened to the well-being? What other forms of physical violence they would experience? Very often break-ins and intimidation. They would lose their job. They would have to go exile. So we wanted to see how that digital level of violence interact with the physical world, and demonstrate that surveillance is not simply a matter of privacy, that it results in very traditional forms of violence, like in the case of Khashoggi, murder even. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and also, as Benjamin always says, that data is not the data we need. It's not the good data. We need different data, the one that the digital platforms are collecting. Hi.
Hello. In 2019, when I was still directing Museum of Architecture and Design in Ljubljana, your work was exhibited in the museum as part of Biennial of Design. It was a research on the living death camp, the 𝗧𝗰𝗁 in Belgrade. And it was a part of the biennial that dealt with data, information, and how it grows into knowledge and becomes wisdom. And in the conversation, you mentioned also how your field should be growing, or how growing as a field was something you talked about with Marta, and how units of similar to your office are popping out in media outlets and in human rights organizations. And I was wondering if forensic architect is the new profession that is necessary and need it now. Does it, and how does it, the knowledge, the methodologies, the tools that you developed, approaches in your pioneering work, how do they enter education now in journalism, in architecture, in criminology? And do you see that?
I mean, thank you. This was very generous. I think it would be a sad, sad world if ours would be what architects need to do. I think architects need to do fabulous, accessible, available environments for the public. I think that I would have loved to be. And I was trained, and I'm not sure I would be totally bad at that. I had an office in Tel Aviv when I was much younger. And, sometimes I'll show you, Marta, if I feel confident enough what it is that we produced in this office. But in a sense, there is a bigger question than the question of architecture. I know you were not. This is not exactly. You were asking a bigger question than that, but I'm kind of taking it as a springboard to say, how do we organize intellectual work in university? How do we organize the relation between the humanities and sciences? How do we rewire the relation between prospective professions like architecture, future-oriented, planning for, and analytic ones, history. I mean, somehow, even if we work for a year on a split-second scenario, it's both architecture and it's history, as it is journalism, as it is human rights, as it is law. And I think that what is interesting and what could be maybe broadly inspiring about our path is the way in which a particular problem, if you don't come at it from a disciplinary perspective, is weaving around it the necessary forms of knowledge, the necessary practices. Filmmaker with an architect, an archaeologist with a lawyer, a botanist with, somebody that is very good in memory reconstruction, a psychologist or psychiatrist, etc. And in a sense, I think that it kind of, us sitting here at the university, completely challenges this sort of siloed way in which the kind of education is happening. And I think also, and this is something that Matt and I have written in the book Investigative Aesthetics, that the investigative mode is also a challenge to the critical mode with which we lived for 100 years or so in the humanities. It's not that it needs to surpass it. It's not that it's not critical. It includes elements of criticality and criticism, because we need sometimes to deconstruct lying statements made by states, as we need to construct something new. But the investigative mode has a different motor to it. A problem is something to be discovered that organizes and bring together different forms of knowledge, different kind of energies, different sort of, different speeds and different directions of thinking. That's something that's really inspiring me in that, because it's a way of reaching out. So for me, architecture is not like a disciplinary home or like a disciplinary fortress. Is like an airport from which you leave in different destination and weave your way as you do so.
Thank you.
It would be nice to have a forensic architecture in every newspaper, though. A forensic architect. you should start sprogging like that all through the international media.
Hi, Eyal. Hi, Marta. Yeah, it will be good. I mean, it's actually happening, right? More or less, the discipline is slowly becoming a reality, and that's very encouraging, actually. Even if you look at the latest investigations by New York Times and, as Eyal mentioned, Washington Post and so on, I think we're getting there. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of the discipline, because, in a way, the whole notion of open source intelligence kind of started growing very, very early on as the spread of the access to the networks, the internet happened, right? And if you look at historically, the US intelligence community started using the term open source intelligence kind of in the mid-90s, and opened an office in that regard and so on. So that was a very interesting time. And, in parallel, there was Robert David Steele with his open source intelligence agency, who was the first kind of anti-state actor, let's call him so, even though he comes from let's say, politically another pole, that started talking about the potential uses of this intelligence as a counter narrative to the official state narratives. But already in intelligence, we have, of course, this. Okay, let me formulate my question here. When you mentioned several times during today's talk that you have to really decide which cases you will take on. Yeah, so there is, and you mentioned a word. Now I forgot it, but it was how much it touches you in a way, right? I mean, there was something about that, and so there is a very emotional, let's call it. That is, in my opinion, quite an emotional kind of point of taking, which is counter to what intelligence gathering is supposed to be, which is this very rational process, which I know you are undertaking, and you are actually performing it extremely well when that is happening. But of course, there is this pre-filtering, and I'm curious about this pre-filtering, because that's where kind of the chosen narratives get started, and the ones that are not chosen are discarded. And I think that's a very interesting point, because if you look at, Bellingcat has done some incredible work, especially around the whole situation in Russia, contemporary Russia at the moment, by using extremely, astute methods, which of course were could be deemed almost unethical, if you want, right? Because they also gathered data from a large amount of open sources of leaked data or stolen data or bought data on the dark web, which kind of cast a very wide net, for that investigation. And you have to have a very, very precise methodology where that widely cast net does not catch also unwanted fish, So I'm just curious, about, because the methods are very similar, right? And I'm just curious about the filtering and, how that happens, and what are the discussions around that? Because I think the filtering of the decision making in these cases is extremely important. That's
It's
my
even
wide question.
No, it's fantastic, because there is no, there's a kind of a diagram between agency and ethical work, right? And there are principles that we, there's data protection, sort of regulations, and there is protocols for dealing with witnesses, And there are moments where you need to actually make a decision of how to navigate them, and what do you actually lose if you don't do that. So now with the Navalny, I guess this is the 𝗫𝗁𝗁𝗀 investigation on Navalny. There was that question for 𝗫𝗁𝗁𝗀, and I know that they were agonizing about it, and I know that it's kind of at the threshold. The data that they got out of the dark web is kind of at the limit of what you can call open source. No, I mean it's you need to argue for this to be open source. On the other hand, it contained what it is that they needed to do, and they had to measure it in relation to the success of this project. We would have in forensic architecture, a very different relation to, as an organization that works very closely and is commissioned usually by victims. We would be much more careful. Sometimes people claim too careful. When even if we find things, there is, you can find a video that is on Twitter and has been retweeted 16 times. But you take it, you integrate it into a video that you edit, and you know that your video is going to be seen 150,000 times. So you amplify something that is not private, it's in the public domain, but unseen. You create a different landscape of risk for that person. So if a person would know that they put something on Twitter and that's going to be seen, it could be, I guess that their calculation could be different. And we need to always take it into account. So for us, it's not enough that something is in the public domain. We need to factor in that kind of adverse effect of amplification. So we even, for us, the threshold is not even the public. We take it even further, much further back. And on our work on the, in fact, it was with 𝗫𝗁𝗁𝗀, a collaboration we did with 𝗫𝗁𝗁𝗀 on the Black Lives Matter protest. We decided to redact all the videos and to describe the videos in words. And that was an interesting process, a kind of a video analysis, open source investigation that is basically words. We've done it several times. We've done it also in relation to one police shooting in Chicago when we were asked to present the work later in the Chicago Biennale, Architectural Biennale. In the last minute, we felt we're not going to display that video, and we translated the whole work into verbal description of what you see. And sometimes it works, and in this case, it did. Yeah.
So there's always a contract with the audience, basically, also, right? So
it's not even the audience; it's the producer. It's a much more intimate contract that you have, because you have a contract with the producer. Sometimes, you can take a piece of work, you can pay money, you have the rights for it, etc. When on open source, it's much more work of trust, and you need to see if people sometimes put themselves at risk by posting things. Sometimes people post their own violations. And we go like, if the police is now going to look at the Black Lives Matter platform that we've done, they would see people, making minor, violation of the law, but violation of the law. And actually our tool could be used by the police to hunt down these people. So the contract is much more, the contract between the producer of the image and the investigator is more intimate than between the viewer than the producer somehow. The producer is a collaborator of us. We care about them. It's not like we have a duty of care to anyone that produced this material. for us, every video, every user-generated video is also a testimony, because a video records from both ends. It records what the person is saying. Sometimes people cry, sometimes people shout, sometimes people curse, sometimes people explain. Very, very rarely do they not say anything while they film an important event. And one need to listen to people. Sometimes you cannot meet them. And the moment of intimacy is listening to the people that are filming something else. What's happening with them? Are they at risk? Are they aware of the risk? Should we contact them? Etc. So that is, you become very, very, the minute that you watch a piece of video that you find online, day in, day out, you spend like a good few months with a piece of video, you become very intimate with the video and with the person that's produced it. And you understand that it's a matter of co-production, even if you don't meet this person.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Also, you're blocking the possibility of counter forensics, I guess. So your work doesn't become evidence for something else. Hi, Nature. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Hi, Marko.
Hello.
Good to see you too. I'm doing fantastic, and Eyal, it's just wonderful to meet you. Your work is beyond inspiring.
Oh, come on! No, it was lovely to be part of this.
Now, today, as always, we have selected 3 questions from the audience. The first one coming by 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 I'm interested in the way that you conceive of matter in a frontier between human and non-human, art and activism, architecture and justice. Given your absorption of multiple methodologies and modes of viewing and acting, how does the opening up of the imagination square with the production of truth? And how does the uncovering of truth produce change, or does it?
No, it's great. Thank you, Bernadette. And it's really nice to connect after long. We used to be colleagues at Goldsmiths. Are we still colleagues at Goldsmiths? I don't know, we are kind of all a bit siloed here. So the idea is that when you say that acts of verification, or what we call open verification, acts of collaborative construction, you kind of understand, you have a different relation to truth than something that is simply there. So the kind of like the classic notion is to lie requires invention, imagination, construction, creativity. To find the truth is to allow the things to speak for itself. No? Now, I don't think that anything speaks for itself. I think that every act of speech is a translation and mediation and a construction. And that the minute that you start weaving through, you know, the aesthetics of leaves, of surfaces, of, you know, our own machine learning, you know, kind of classifiers, our ability to look at videos within architectural models, that requires imagination. The imagination of how things could connect to each other, of how to amplify weak signals, because, you know, counter-forensics is defined by the fact that the state always sees more and has better access to the scene of the crime. We need to amplify weak signals. And you amplify what is there by weaving it together in an imaginative way. So imagination and truth should not be thought of as opposites to each other, but as constitutive parts. And this is where also the relation to politics is, I think. Because for us also, the importance of each one of the cases is in opening up a political imagination, for possibility of resistance, of the governed to those that govern us, a different way of thinking through history, in a way of this kind of telescoping that I said. Within a split second, you find the long structural forces of a case. And knowing exactly how, and not always we manage to do it, but we always try, how to work tactically, how particularly this case has a coalition organized around it. It could be mobilized and could be produce political change. Because the fact and the legal case it is in is only as good as the political process it is part of.
Thank you. Thank you, Eyal. Now, Micah asked the following question. How does forensic architecture approach the so-called environmental violence?
So we have a little section of forensic architecture called the Center for Contemporary Nature that is run by my colleague, 𝗬𝗰𝗁𝗂𝗧𝗏. And we are in it investigating environmental violence. And environmental violence needs that kind of telescoping it's a much more radical way. So sometimes we investigate huge stretches of time. Our analysis of the environmental violence against the threshold of the desert in Palestine, the destruction of that environment, and the displacement of the indigenous people, the Bedouins in it, needed to rely on analysis of aerial images that are more than 100 years old, i.e. aerial images from the First World War, when we look down into the grain that in the negative and kind of find clues for what we were looking to find, i.e. you need to drill down to the molecular level of a film, more or less. As it is looking and studying and cataloging contemporary vegetation in these parts, as it is about reading literature that is 300 years old of travelers that have passed through this area. When you don't have meteorological record, when you say that the issue of environmental violence need to reconstruct the weather throughout centuries, and you know that meteorological measurements have begun at least in Palestine around the 1930s, you need to find traces of the weather in the writing of people, in the price of grain, in fossils, in all sort of other, non-linear kind of measurements. And you need to compose a kind of a long history from those small traces. And this is one thing that we're trying to do. We're also working in the tropical areas of the Amazon on deforestation. We're currently working in Colombia for the Colombian Truth Commission, also on issues of environmental violence on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. We had to reconstruct 100 square kilometers of landscape, tree by tree, landscape that doesn't exist anymore, within gaming engines, because we needed to understand how the transformation of the landscape, the loss of the mangroves, the complete terraforming of the area has changed with both environmental and human violence against the environment and violence against people. So it's a major part of our work, and it's the frontier of our work, and we want to engage more in that as we are moving forward to combine frameworks of human rights and environment together.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, for our third and last question, RF is wondering if you could talk a bit more about the politics of dissemination and distribution of the traces you excavate. Is the scope to articulate a counter-universal truth, he asks, or create space for a diversity of perspectives towards a distributed truth?
Yeah, I mean, initially it's a kind of a practice that is oriented against government statements. We understand that the violence of colonialism, colonial violence, as I've grown up in the anti-colonial movement in Israel-Palestine could tell you, it's always a violence against people and things, and it's a violence against the truth of what has happened. It's a machine, epistemological wrecking ball that destroys traces, that destroys history and destroys records. And when I'm working on enforced disappearance, when forensic actors are working on enforced disappearances in Mexico or in other places in the Southern American cone or in other places, you understand that enforced disappearance is itself a kind, it's both, it has one physical part, taking hold, often killing and hiding bodies, and it has a bureaucratic part, which is the constant and always manipulation of fact. So the enforced disappearance does not end until the epistemic part of that violence is not ended, the bureaucratic part of that violence. Therefore, it's not so much about allowing all facts to exist in a sort of, sort of parliament, equal parliaments of claims and facts, because truth claims could be murderous and repressive and could be the condition for physical violence to take place. So they need to be resisted. And they need to be resistant, though, not through a point of single perspectival expertise, but through weaving together a common ground, the commons, from the multiple perspectives of all people collaborating on the investigations that have different forms of knowledge and that needs to be seen as equally important. The embodied knowledge and experience of frontline communities, the photographic intelligence of somebody with a camera, the analytic skills of a scientist or technologist coming together, mobilized through the work of a good lawyer, which is always a pleasure to hear. So, it's multiple perspective joining together, not to establish something solid, but a fabric of the commons that is always elastic and dynamic and could be morphed and changed as more facts are coming, but not. So for me, it's not so much kind of a good neighborly relation between opposite perception of the world, but a careful weaving of multiple perspectives together in a way that sometimes is difficult and requires negotiation and always need to be remained open as more facts come.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you, and of course, big thanks to our online audience posing so many great questions in the chat.
It was lovely.
Now, Marta, it was a pleasure and an honor to do this for 8 episodes straight. And now, for the last time, I give the mic back to you.
Thank you, Neja. The honor was entirely mine. And thank you, everyone, for following us for the last 8 episodes, a whole year of conversations with exceptional thinkers and visionaries like Eyal. Thank you, Eyal, for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, thank you for your work, for your very, very inspiring enormous body of work and experience, and I hope I'll see you soon again. Well,
yeah, hopefully soon. It was lovely, and hope to see you all in Ljubljana at some point.
Excellent. Let's meet all in Ljubljana at some point. Well, I give it back to you, Janice. Bye to you all. Bye.
Also, this final episode has come to an end. Thanks, Marta. Thanks, Eyal, for the insightful discussion, and also to our guests in the studio and to all of you who decided to follow us and contribute to the debate through the web chat. Reprogramming ends here. It has been a challenging but fantastic and rewarding journey, during which we have had the opportunity to address topical issues with international thinkers and selected local guests. None of this would have been possible without the effort and dedication of curator and host Marta Perano and the members of our editorial and technical staff. So thanks again to each one of you. Reprogramming was conceived for the 10th edition of Tactics and Practice, the series of conferences organized by Axioma in collaboration with Kino Šiška, and realized within the framework of KON's platform for contemporary investigative arts. To stay up to date on our programs, events, and publications, follow Axioma on social media and subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels. That's all, folks. Greetings from Ljubljana. Na sviđenje.
Thank you.